Rory, welcome to the Personal Best podcast.
Thanks, Ruby.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really excited for today's conversation. I know we've been saving up a lot of things to talk about for this episode, so I think we're going to cover a lot of interesting ground.
Yeah.
You are a life coach who helps high achievers dealing with insecurity. Don't know if that's a good enough summary.
I think it's a great place to start.
Amazing.
The soundbite is I coach successful men who don't feel successful.
Yeah.
But what does that resonates, or it may resonate, but what does it really mean?
Mm-hmm.
It means I coach predominantly men
Mm-hmm.
whose insecurities have driven them to achieve, and they've achieved materially, but they don't feel like it's enough. They don't feel like they're enough. It doesn't feel like they thought success would feel like. And that's often because the insecurity drove the success, or the achievement rather, and they've achieved, but they're still living with the insecurities that drove them to achieve.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And I have heard people sort of talk about this phenomenon, for want of a better word, in terms of people who've outwardly achieved this success, but are still left with this feeling of not really being good enough. And obviously that's what your coaching aims to help people with. So we'll dig into all of that. But I think it's probably best to start with a bit of your personal story, if you're happy to share that with people. Can you just sort of talk about your own experience and perhaps how that led you to this area of coaching?
Yes, I can. But like corral me, like
Okay.
keep me controlled here, and like don't let me veer off too much. So why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Why is this my life's work? So first and foremost, I am a very flawed man, and I found that insecurity drove me to achieve, and that nothing felt right, no matter how much money I made, how many countries I visited, how hot the girlfriends were, how expensive the watches were, whatever. I felt like something was missing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left the industry I worked in, my first career, which was as a trader in commodities, I felt like I'd taken off my armor and that I was completely empty inside, that I'd built an external persona based on, I'm finding it difficult not to use like coachy type language.
It's okay.
So I'm going to try to keep it real, but I felt like I'd kind of built and reinforced a suit of armor based on external validation, external measures of success. And I was completely sort of hollowed out. Like I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I stood for. I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. What was the fucking point?
Yeah.
What was I existing for?
So interesting that you sort of used that explanation, because I had a previous guest on called Milo, and we were talking about how a lot of men sort of deal with this same struggle. And essentially, if you sort of strip away all these materialistic things like the watches and the cars and the clothes and the girlfriends, and you're just your naked self, if you can't be happy and confident as that version of you, then it's very likely that all these other things aren't really going to help that. And so I think it's a really, really great point that you made. And I'm sure you'll go on to this, but was there like a pivotal point where you realized you needed to say, do the work?
Yes, although the idea of doing the work it's like that's a post hoc rationalization.
Mm.
What I mean is I would have never have used that language.
Sure.
I had at the time, no conscious thought that I had work to do. That's like 2020 hindsight now. I look back and I go, yeah, that was my call to serve on my hero's journey, and I needed to do the work, but I never thought like that then. And then was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
For context. That at the time it was more about survival. Not literal in terms of I was going to be destitute on the streets without food, without shelter. Although, and we can talk about this, like often our thinking catastrophizes to that point of view, or rather to that place. It's not rational, it's not logical, but we go there emotionally because ultimately as humans, the thing we fear the most is like being cast out of the tribe to like die alone in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And that drives a lot of, or that's behind a lot of the insecurities that drive
because you want to
people
fit in
to achieve. Because you think, the more status I can acquire, the more symbols of status I can acquire, the more stuff, the more money, the more whatever, the safer I'll be. And that's because fundamentally, from an evolutionary point of view, that's true. So part of the whole dichotomy here is that these aren't inherently bad drives, and they bring with them a great deal of benefit. Like I often say to friends, family, clients, people, like people in my life who are this type A personality, this high achiever, there was a great deal of benefit to be had from the insecurities that drove you to achieve. And so it's not binary. It's not about, right, you had to be this person to achieve, and now you've got to be a completely different other person to enjoy the fruits of your labor or the achievements or anything else. I think like a lot of people, I had to hit a kind of personal rock bottom.
Yeah.
It almost had to get so bad that I was forced to take action. And so for me, that meant quitting a job, not knowing where I was going in life, who I was. I was probably a functional alcoholic. I smoked. My relationships were in shit state. Like I was attracting the wrong type of people. I wasn't being the man that I could or should be in relationships. I wasn't being the son I wanted to be. I wasn't being the brother I wanted to be. I wasn't being the friend I wanted to be. It manifested as it often does with people in a physical way. So with me, it's like Crohn's disease and digestive kind of bowel issues, but it was also mental as well. I was incredibly angry all the time about the smallest things.
Yeah, and just what you're explaining there, I think, is really important for people to realize. And you touched on this in our conversation earlier, that the things that make you successful in the type of job that you did, it's commodities, right? Actually make you pretty shit at the rest of life.
Yes, and it's what's kind of going back to those evolutionary drives. What's really pernicious about it all is that we're fairly simplistic, aren't we, in terms of our psychology? It's like we need a few things to feel safe. We need status. We need access to mates. We need food, shelter, obviously, and all those things correlate with status within like our tribal social hierarchy. And like in the modern day, what gives us status? Job title, money, and the things we can buy with the money. Right? So it's playing into all these evolutionary drives, right? So I'm becoming more short-tempered, more aggressive, more sarcastic, more self-centered, and all of that is making me a better broker, trader,
Of course,
and I'm
yeah.
being financially rewarded. So my status is increasing in the industry, in my company, but also societally with the things I can buy and afford and everything else. And so you've got this feedback loop where my monkey brain is going, yeah, this has got to be good because you're being rewarded for these behaviors.
Yeah, and I'm sure
Man,
you can see that in hindsight now,
yeah,
having
it's
got
all
to where you
hindsight.
are.
At the time, I wasn't thinking, right, I'm going
Mm,
to take action because I can see here that I can see the negative consequences of this reward cycle that I'm in. I wasn't thinking that at all. I was thinking there's something wrong with my gut. I don't know what's going on here. I want to quit smoking. I want to look better. I want to feel better. I want to. What's the point of me? I want to stand for something. I don't know
yeah.
what I'm doing with my life. That's what I was thinking at the time.
And it's funny because I wonder if your solution at the time was, well, I need to work harder. I need to do more. I need to find the thing that's going to make me feel fulfilled.
Why is it? Why do we see if we preach hard work as the solution, as the answer? Why are we actually choosing the easiest work? Because the hardest work is to stop,
Mm-hmm.
is to do less, is to look internally,
Mm-hmm.
is to go deep, is to do the emotional work, is to understand who you are, is to understand who the best version of you is to understand what pulls you into versions of yourself that are not serving, that are not the best version, that cause you problems, that cause you distress, that cause you anxiety, that cause you depression. Like that's the really hard work. But actually, particularly as men, we think, no, the really hard work is actually to completely avoid that, distract ourselves from the necessity of that, and get up earlier, go to the gym earlier, sweat more, work longer hours, start a side hustle,
Mm.
go into monk mode and like cut ourselves off and not drink for 3 months and not use porn for 3 months and not date for 3 months and not do and like come out anew, fresh, as if we can go into some sort of like masculine chrysalis
Yeah.
and come out like a new guy with no problems, as if like just going away and working harder is the solution to dealing with all of the underlying issues, all of the
Yeah.
underlying problems. It's running away, really. So often hard work is just running away.
I'm really glad you've brought that up because it chimes in with a lot of conversations I've already had on the podcast with people in terms of this idea of, do hard things. And particularly for men, as you say, there's this idea of hustle culture and grinding in silence. And it's interesting because I guess a lot of those habits and behaviors that go into that are healthy and are positive, but it's just, I think if you go into the mindset of, well, I need to do all of these things and be super dialed in and I just need to do this by myself, as you say, you're probably not going to come out the other end as this beautifully polished, well-rounded version of yourself. In fact, you might end up further away from where you wanted to be. But all that leads on to a question I really want to ask you, which will kind of open up this conversation a bit more, which is, what do you think is the biggest mistake people, and I guess this could be more angled at men, make in the pursuit of success?
I think fundamentally we've all got different conceptions of what material success is. We've all got different conceptions of what high achievement is. And that's absolutely fine. And you might want to represent your achievement by buying a Lamborghini or you might have an entirely other way of representing achievement. And that's personal preference. But if the pursuit of the thing, the Lamborghini, the signifier of status, your big thing, your thing that you think, when I've got that, I've made it, if that isn't founded on an idea of who you are at your very best, how you put yourself in that place, how you find your way back to that place when you get pulled off by the stresses and strains of life, if you don't have that conception of self, and I believe if you're not serving something that's greater than you, then you'll never feel successful.
So the problem is almost attaching your sense of self-worth to a status symbol or to that external validation. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. So that's the first part, I think. If your sense of self or your self-esteem is attached to that external status symbol, then there's no way of nourishing yourself, your self-esteem. There's no way of, you're at the whim or mercy of whether you achieve the thing or not.
Yes.
So it's fraught with like so much risk, so much danger.
Yeah.
That isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, we need some drive to achieve. There needs to be some strive. There probably needs to be some risk at play. That gets the best out of us to a certain extent. But from the foundational position of, like, I know who I am and I know what I stand for. And I know that if I show up as that man, that's the best version of me possible today. I might want a bit better for myself, but I love the best version of me right now.
Yeah. But I think it's really good to sort of identify that it's not the materialistic thing that is inherently good or bad. People can obviously purchase whatever they want with money that they've made, and that's fine. But I think it is really good to sort of do that personal interrogation and find out why you might want that thing. But also I understand that sometimes you only realize that afterwards. Like, I had another guest on called Santino, and when he started to make a bit more money, he bought a Mercedes, drove around the Mercedes for a bit, but the feeling of, enjoyment he got from that wore off pretty quick. And actually he ended up selling the car because it wasn't the thing he thought that was going to make him happy or feel better or accrue that status. And there's definitely a point to be made about, I think it's mentioned in the psychology of money, that if you're sort of doing it for external validation from other people, people actually don't really care who's driving the car. People just see the thing and they want it for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's something else that people might want to think about is, are you doing it for yourself or are you doing it for other people?
And doing it for other people in the negative sense, i.e. doing it to create a feeling in somebody else of like envy or jealousy or comparison. Not, you mean that, yeah?
Yes.
Not do it for other people as in
the greater good and helping people. Good. Precisely. But I think what you said at the beginning about how you summarize your coaching is really interesting. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think successful people often don't feel successful?
There's probably different things at play. But as part of that mix of different things at play, insecurity's a key driver. There's such an irony to achievement based, achievement driven by insecurity, and that's your diligent, hardworking, desires to be better, interested in growth, interested in being their personal best, i.e. all the listeners to your podcast. There's that type of person is always going to do too much. And what I mean by that is they're using the tools of a lazy person, but they're not a lazy person. So your insecurity that drives you to achieve is, I need to put more hours in. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I'm not experienced enough. I'm not working as hard as I should be. I'm not working as hard as I could be. And that's all just personal comparison. Forget all the comparison to your colleagues and your peers and people on social media. That's just in your internal measure. You're not meeting your own standard. And there's this worry that if I'm not more, if I'm not better, I'm going to slide off into mediocrity.
Absolutely.
Like if I give myself an inch, I know myself, I'm a lazy fucker, I'll take a mile.
I've had this even doing the podcast because I've been so consistent with it, uploading every Monday, pushing out content. And I sort of said I've taken a break and I found it quite hard to sort of build that momentum again. And I think I said on my stories recently that I'm in the process of recording episodes as we are here and that I'll be back soon. And my friend messaged me and said, "You're so hard on yourself. And also, there's no rules to this. Nobody has made the rule for me that I have to upload every single Monday without fail in order to keep doing this podcast. I've put that on myself. And when I'm not meeting that, I can be I hear that like denigrating voice in my head that's like, you're not good enough, like this podcast isn't going to be anything. And so I completely understand how actually that internal voice can be so loud sometimes.
Let's use, if you don't mind, we'll use your example here that you've brought up.
Yeah.
So your internal voice is loud, is denigrating. You took a break from doing podcasts and now it's saying to you, come on, like you should be doing more. And if you don't do more, what comes next? If you don't get back on the horse and make more podcasts, what follows for you?
I think my brain tells me that I look like a failure in the eyes of other people and that I've said I was going to do something and I haven't fulfilled that.
So you'd look like a failure if you didn't get back and make your podcasts.
Yeah.
And then you've not fulfilled on your word. And maybe you've not fulfilled on your potential, or you've wasted an opportunity.
Yes. All of the
And
above.
maybe what follows that is, and it's not the first time you've done that, is it, Ruby? Because remember when you did that in the past and then that thing, and do you remember when you didn't fulfill your potential there? And actually you're destined to be a failure. Does that resonate with you? That's how our mind goes. That's
so mean.
It is mean, and and actually let's like flag up the idea of it being mean and come back to like being more empathetic to ourselves, but just staying on this example of yours because it's great. The good news, Ruby, is you're never going to slide into mediocrity. You're not destined for failure, because everything that drove you to start a podcast, to set rules for yourself, like I'm going to make one, I'm going to post every Monday, that internal voice now that's saying, right, get back on this. You've made a commitment to yourself, fulfill on the commitment to yourself. All of those things about you, about who you inherently are, your authentic best, your personal best, it's called the Personal Best Podcast, right? All those things that are the makeup of your personal best mean that you can't be a failure.
Yeah.
But you are, earlier I said, you're a high achiever, or the problem is being like a high achiever with a low achiever mentality, or rather using low achiever tools.
Yeah.
Like you're telling yourself, this isn't good enough. I need to get back on this. I need to work harder. Now that's what the person who hasn't started the podcast, who's sitting around in their pants, not doing anything with their life, needs to be telling themselves.
Exactly.
It's not what you need to be telling yourself.
Yes.
But you torture yourself with that, as we all do.
Yeah.
Because we also derive a lot of benefit from that. So nothing's ever binary. It's always nuance. It's always balance.
Mm.
You need a certain amount of, come on, Ruby, you haven't made a podcast in a few weeks, balanced against, yeah, but I've got good serving reasons for doing that. And if you can see that all through the prism of what's authentically Ruby, like when I'm at my best, when I'm realizing my personal best, am I sometimes taking a break from podcasting to focus on other things that like serve me? You're nodding at me. The answer's probably yes, right? So that is part of you at your best. It's not, oh, I'm a poor version of me because I haven't made a podcast for a few weeks. But what happens is if we follow the story, if we follow the internal narrative of, yeah, but you're lazy and you've set a standard and you can't meet standards and it's not the first time you've done this, and actually you're going to fail at this podcast endeavor and you're destined to be a failure and all the way down to, and then I won't be loved and then I'll die alone, which is where it ends. Like when you get pulled off into that, spending all that energy over there, worrying about that thing or trying to fight the unwinnable battle against those like non-useful thoughts or self-limiting beliefs, you're not being personal best.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, because I probably really needed to hear that. But I think that is really useful advice in terms of everybody's going to have probably those two different voices and one's going to be slightly louder than the other. But actually, if we can find the harmony between them is where we can achieve our personal best. And I want to come on to this idea of having self-belief and feeling like we are enough while striving for more, because I think that is the key problem in all of this self-development talk is, okay, we want to be striving for more and achieving things and setting goals, but also being happy and being present. And I think a lot of people will probably resonate with that. So I just wondered, what advice would you have for people, for the high achievers, to cultivate self-compassion and self-belief?
It starts with, there's fundamentally two aspects, I think. One is awareness. Like everything starts with awareness. So when your internal voice is saying, oh, you should have really done a podcast this week and you haven't yet done one, and actually remember you set a standard and now you're falling short of it and now you're going to fail at this whole podcasting thing. It's the awareness to go to even know that you've got an internal voice that might not be inherently who you are. That you are not your thoughts. That the things that you say to yourself can be serving you and they can be limiting you, and that you've got a choice whether to repeat them. You've got a choice whether to reinforce the belief or not.
Yeah.
So it's knowing that A, you are not your thoughts. B, you get to choose which ones you follow and which ones you don't follow. And that gives you then some space to operate in. And it gives you a bit of presence. And then within that space to operate, who are you? As your best authentic self, who are you? What do you stand for? How do you both set yourself up every day to be that person? And how, if you're not feeling like that, if you are feeling dragged off into these other places, these lesser versions, I call them limited personas. Like, as in, imagine there's a kind of board of directors internally, or imagine you're a manager of a sports team and you've got like a bench of substitutes and you can choose who to play. Like think of all your multifaceted nature, all of your personas being sat on that bench or sat at that board. Like, who we letting speak, who we picking to play here. And a lot of the time we're it's just completely random. We have a thought, we follow it. It often originates in a limiting belief, and we're playing this version of ourselves that isn't our authentic best, isn't our personal best.
Yeah.
So like know that, then know who your authentic best is. Then practice choosing. Like set yourself up every day, prime yourself to be your authentic best. And then when you catch yourself not being that person, go, okay, how can I reverse engineer this? Like for me, for example, when I'm at my authentic best, I'm curious, I'm playful, and I'm like holding the frame for somebody else, for their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I'm that person in that balance, getting those things balanced, that's the best version of Rory. That's
Yeah.
my authentic best. Now I can journal in the morning to remind myself of that, and that sets me up for the day. But then say I catch myself later in the day being pulled off into this negative emotion and not feeling quite right or at my best, I can then be like, right, the next interaction I have, be curious, be playful, and like hold the frame for that person.
Yeah.
And then I can't help but be the best version of me. Because if I embody those characteristics, if I play the role of the best version of me, it will come through.
Yeah. And just like thinking about what you're saying and how I would probably answer those questions, and I'm going to have to go away and like do some deeper thinking. But what I really like about what you're saying is that actually it's much more about being present and being okay with who you are right now. Because I think a lot of people think, well, my best self's in the future. And yeah, we can all make progress. I'm not saying that you have to not change anything, but it's almost when you like pin your identity to like a future version of you and you think, well, until I've done this, this, and this, I can't be that person. Whereas actually, if you can take some time each day to try and act as your most authentic self, your best self in that moment, I think would help people feel that contentment day to day a bit more.
Yeah, there's an irony there, isn't there?
Yeah.
This idea of the personal best being in the future to yet be realized. So like if we really crudely generalize, let's think about men and women and like finding a partner, falling in love, dating, right? So you might hear a man say something like, well, when I've got this job or when I've made that much money, then I'll be ready to date. And you might hear a woman say something more like, yeah, but when I've lost the weight and I look great in that outfit, then I'll be ready to date.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, men and women also think those other things.
Sure.
But as a crude generalization. But the problem is that you are never going to make the money or lose the weight if you act purely from a place of self-loathing. If you don't like who you are now, I'm not saying that we love ourselves no matter what, that we give ourselves an easy ride, that we let ourselves off all of our bad behavior and our negative characteristics. I'm not saying that in the slightest. All I'm saying is just accept that it's part of your makeup. It's not who you are, but it's a choice. And then be responsible for the choices you make.
Yeah.
Right? If you know that lying is not inherently who you are, but is a choice, is a behavior that you choose to engage in, well, now you've got the awareness. So you do owe yourself some responsibility here to do something about that if you don't want to be a liar.
Yeah.
And you don't want the consequences of lying, right? So it's if we act from like that self-loathing, that look, that I will be complete if I achieve the thing, and I won't allow myself to feel complete and love myself until I achieve the thing, you'll never achieve the thing. Because all of the insecurities that you hold around the weight you need to lose or the money you need to make will hold you back from making the money and losing the weight.
Yeah.
So there's a real chicken and egg thing going on here.
Definitely. And I have been there myself, 100%. And so it's really interesting hearing you talk about it. And I guess, I mean, we could go off on so many different tangents, and I'm aware that we don't have much time left. But I think in all of this, there will be people who really resonate with what we're saying in terms of, I am the successful person who doesn't feel like I'm successful, who maybe is driven by insecurities and maybe doesn't believe like I'm enough as I am right now. But there might also be people listening who are very aware that they're not where they want to be yet, and maybe hear these complaints of seemingly successful people and think, well, it's easy for you to say, nice problem to have, like champagne problems, all of that kind of thing. And I think it's obviously difficult because we often don't give much sympathy to the type A people out there, because outwardly it seems like they have all this success. So I'm really glad that this conversation has sort of brought more awareness around actually how people might be feeling even when they are in those positions, because I've learned from having spoken to a lot of people on this podcast who've achieved incredible things that success doesn't necessarily correlate to happiness and fulfillment if we're talking about success in like society's view. And so I guess like a closing question on that is, for people listening, how can they find that internal happiness and that internal contentment?
I think for simplicity, let's use a framework.
Yeah, I love frameworks.
So let's think about awareness, desire, and courage.
Okay.
So first of all, awareness around who you're being and who you're not being. So what's motivating your behavior? A thought. Like, where's that thought originated from? Why did you, what was the feeling that drove the thought that drove the behavior? And then go one step deeper. What was the belief, or what's the belief you hold about yourself, about the world, that created the feeling about this situation that gave you the thought that made you do the thing, right? Build some awareness in there. Then know that you've got a choice, that you are not your thoughts. You don't have to follow all of them, that you don't have to be too attached to all the feelings you feel. Some of them are just a byproduct of what it is to be human. And things that serve you sometimes are limiting on other times. It's not inherently good, bad, positive, negative. It just is what it is in that moment. And you get to choose whether to run with it or not. Now you can make a choice. Do you want to be your authentic best, or do you want to be some lesser limited version of you? Well, assuming you want to be your authentic best, who is that person? Like, who are you being when you're at your best? What are your values? What do you stand for? What does that look like in the world? Right, that's all awareness. Now, desire. Imagine you spent a lot more of your life as your authentic best self. What could you do with it? What are your dreams, hopes, aspirations, and what does better look like for you? Because you're enough, but it's fine to want more, but want more from a place of knowing that you're enough, and that if you can evolve yourself, you could actually have greater impact on the world and help and serve.
Yeah.
So that's desire. Like, what are your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and how do they translate into goals? And then from there, it's courage. You've got to be brave to take action. And the bravest thing you can do is not to start the journey or start taking action, but it's actually, once you start to self-sabotage, is to work through that and continue to take action. And that's where the real courage is.
Yeah, you're so right. Because it's very easy to sort of want to take action when you've got that spur of motivation and sort of everything feels like it's in the right place and it's the right time to do that. But actually, when shit hits the fan, or those thoughts of self-doubt start to creep in again, can you still take courage? I think that's really, really important. I do always ask everybody the same question, but I feel like, to be honest, that perfectly summarizes how people can achieve their personal best. And I know that that is a sort of guiding philosophy in a lot of the coaching that you do. So if people are interested in coaching or want to sort of check out more of what you're doing, where can they go?
They can follow me on Instagram, Rory _MacDonald_coach. They, through there, could reach out to me. They could reach out to me by email, rory@rorymacdonald.coach. But this, I don't like anything that feels like a sales pitch.
Sure.
And not because I don't want to sell, because sometimes coaching somebody, bringing them onto your program is the highest possible good for that person. And therefore, them parting with their money is a great thing for them. So I don't want people to think, I'm not going to pay for a service, or I don't want coaching. I'm here to serve. So if you've got a question, DM me, email me. I will help you in whatever way I think feels best for you in that moment. And that's genuine and
that's amazing.
What I want to be doing.
Yeah. And I'm sure you know this already, but I really do think you're on the right path, and you're clearly so passionate about what you do in terms of helping people. And I think even though you're in this sort of niche in your coaching, I think the messages that you put out and the things you've shared on this podcast today are going to help all sorts of people who are dealing with loads of different things in their personal lives. And so I'm really, really grateful to you. Honestly, I feel like we could have spoke for hours, but unfortunately I do have to wrap this podcast up. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Ruby. Thank you for starting the podcast.
Yay. Long may it continue. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening.